Hi guys, and welcome back to SwitchUp. Now, this wasn't going to be my next review, but after a good chat with my friend Paul over at Switched On Games, we realised that we had very different opinions of this game. Now, not knocking his review at all, he's done an absolutely fantastic job, but we just saw certain key elements of it very differently. So, without further ado, let's get into our review. How did I find American Fugitive? Let's find out. You take on the role of Will Riley, unfortunately in a tragic situation. Your father has just been murdered, and as the person who discovered him in this sleepy town, they've decided that you were guilty. Now, there's more than enough evidence there to suggest that perhaps you weren't, however you go down for the crime. After a short while in prison, things turn south and you find yourself in the infirmary. It's at this point that the character Will decides he's going to break out, and I did find it slightly comical how he just decided he was going to escape and then just does. After a brief jog from the infirmary, leaping a high security fence, and then a short trip through a storm drain,
I have to remind myself that some birds aren't meant to be caged.
it's time to begin finding out exactly what happened to your father with the help of a family member. You meet several characters along the way who will give you unique missions, and dialogue takes place in the form of text with characters' heads popping up on screen. It's all quite stylized, and I like the implementation here. The story isn't going to write any new records, but the writing of each character is good enough, and you become quite attached to Will as the story goes on. Many references are made to how he wasn't a saint before all of this happened, so you don't feel too strange as you're sent on missions to steal cars or rob certain items from people's houses. One thing that Rockstar do so well that separates them from the crowd is the more nuanced storytelling in between. Now, I wouldn't say that this is something American Fugitive has got quite right yet. There really needs to be a few more characters in the mix and perhaps a few sideline events going on. However, there are inferred stories. Sometimes when you're robbing someone's house, you'll find a small note. This will have information that will eventually lead you to some form of treasure, but it's a nice little bit of extra information and story that you have to go out of your way to find out. For example, in one case, I found a note that was referring to someone who had died. I then searched over the town, found her gravesite, and was able to use her date of death as a code back at the house. Now, none of this was actually told to the player, and it's a nice little addition. In perhaps American Fugitive 2, they could go far bigger in terms of the scale of the story, but as it is right now, it gets 14 out of 20. You begin your game plunged into the character as he escapes prison. Holding down a button will allow you to sprint for a short time. There is a stamina wheel that will burn down quite quickly. Later in the game, you can buy upgrades which increase this time, as well as other aspects I'll talk about next. In this experience, you case different buildings for potential loot. As you're looking through the window, you're given an indication as to whether the room is occupied. Moving around the entire house, you can get an idea of whether it's safe to go inside. And this is where the real contention for many players arises. When you do enter, whether you use a crowbar, break a window, or kick the door down, a timer will instantly begin and is shown at the top of the screen. Within this time, you must choose which rooms to enter and then loot them. Each room is given its own time gauge, showing you how long it's going to take to search that room for potential items. Now, I personally quite like this system, as it meant that you could go into a building and you had to quickly on the fly calculate which rooms you should search. I thought perhaps the longer timer means that that room has better loot, and 9 times out of 10 that paid off. The real issue is that not every house would have an alarm in it, so some might find that frustrating. However, I felt that if they didn't have that mechanic in the game, then you could potentially go to any house and just loot everything once you'd found a method of entering quietly. When I watched a house from a distance, I would wait until someone exited, so the owner of the house comes out, I would sneak up behind them and tap them on the shoulder with my lead pipe. Shortly after, I'd borrow their keys, and you can enter the house without setting off any alarms whatsoever. After dragging the body to your car and sticking them in the boot for no apparent reason, I just like borrowing people. Then you can go around the house without a timer. It's really good, and I enjoyed this method. To me, it felt a lot more realistic, as well as using the keys in someone's door is obviously not going to raise any type of suspicion from people watching or from the alarm system. Houses varies from the more expensive silverware and jewellery to some absolute toot. Your inventory management is based on weight, so you must be really careful about what you take with you, and items can then be sold off at the pawn shop. That's pawn shop. You can buy cars and phone up companies to send you these, but really there isn't a great amount to spend your cash on in this game. And that's one thing again that Rockstar Games do so well with their series. As you would expect, there are several different vehicles to choose from. You can hijack these quite easily, but there's also quite a bit more nuance to it. If you find a parked one, you can smash the window but potentially set the alarm off. Again, there are different and quieter ways to do this, but overall, it's a much more realistic experience in terms of how cars are stolen. If the police get wind of a crime that you've committed, then this will be shown at the top of the screen. Unfortunately, as of the time of writing, they are incredibly aggressive, and this is something that both Paul and I agreed on. It took me a while to see exactly how aggressive they can be, but once again, even if you're on 5 stars, the game gives you several ways of evading them. If you can get back into a vehicle, there are either places for you to hide the car and wait for your current star rating to reduce, or you can take clothing from someone's washing line and hide out in the woods. There is also the pay and spray, it's not called that, but let's be honest, that's what it is, to change the colour of your vehicle and lose the star rating completely. The real issue is that sometimes police can just pop up out of nowhere, which could be irritating, especially if you play with a much more aggressive style. I did like the way that the police gradually surround a building that you're in if you get caught while trying to burgle it. Each window shows a symbol of an officer, and you have to almost run to the other side of the building and then jump out. And I had many thrilling chases after this occurred, but never found that I was captured. If you are captured or you die, then you'll lose every piece of loot in your inventory, which is going to really sting if you've managed to gain lots of gear. You won't lose, however, all the experience that you've gained throughout the game, and it does have an RPG-esque leveling up mechanic. When you level up, you can choose from certain skills, and these, as mentioned before, will increase your ability to either stay undetected, sprint for longer, which is most welcome, gain more health, or a plethora of other things that will make the experience more palatable. I feel like I haven't really said much about the actual core control mechanics. When on foot, you can push the left stick to move around the world, and there's an incredible amount of detail here. If you pass through a bush, your character will be seen to struggle his way through. Vaulting over a wall is quite easy, but the world itself has trains moving around it and a ton of vehicles. The control of these varies wildly depending on the type of car. If you're plodding around in a tractor, which I'm not gonna lie, I actually really enjoyed, or an American muscle car, which is more squirrely than a squirrel, there is a vast difference in the handling. It makes sense to me that a very powerful vehicle is difficult to handle and that a tractor handles like a tractor. The issue I have is with the performance of the game, and we'll get into that in the next section. I really enjoyed the gameplay of American Fugitive. It is hindered massively by the performance, as we'll discuss next, and there isn't a great deal of side content like the many time trial style races that you can undertake for cash, the more unusual missions that you're given to do, such as stealing a dress. The ability to rob houses is a nice touch. I would give gameplay 15 out of 20. Visuals and performance are not quite where they need to be. My main issue with the game is it appears to have some form of memory leak. Sometimes it runs buttery smooth, and it looks to me to be an uncapped frame rate, which, you know, you either like or you don't. It's not a solid 30, it's not a solid 60, it kind of fluctuates somewhere in the middle. The real issue is that the fluctuations aren't consistent, and sometimes it will judder along as you're driving around the world, and this often made me feel physically sick. That's not okay. I found the issue in handheld was slightly negated, and for the most part it was quite smooth, but I really sincerely hope the developers look at patching this one up. Judder in performance also means that when you're controlling your vehicle, it can be very difficult to judge turns and decide when you should slow down, as a sudden judder will cause you to miss time and fly off the track. The actual core look of the game is wonderful. The animations of your character are so detailed for such a small person. Little inclusions like a train whistling its way around the track, the barriers closing and having to wait for it are a nice and unexpected addition. Smoke kicks up from your tyres as you launch around a track, and I very much enjoyed the hand-drawn cartoon characters. And although the map isn't overly huge, the small town has some very distinct areas. There's the poorer part in the upper left corner, while conversely there's also the rich estate. There's a lot of character here. The whole world is also physics-based. The audio is another strong point in terms of the soundtrack they've chosen. Unfortunately, and it's a real noticeable thing for this type of game, there are no radio stations in your car, which would have been a most welcome addition. Car sounds, environmental and police are all of a good standard, with the weapon controls as you use a twin stick method to shoot working well and sounding good. Perhaps the game would have benefited from some character narration, and the lack of radios becomes noticeable in more quiet sections. Visuals score 13 out of 20. The performance is the major detractor for me, whereas audio is very good, they just could have used a radio. That scores 17 out of 20. The game is currently £14.39 or $15.99 or €15.99. For my money, that's a very reasonable price for the amount of work and attention that's gone into it. Unfortunately, as it stands right now, there are issues here that need to be patched, but I still had a very good time with the game. If you're looking for an old school Grand Theft Auto style experience, then I for one would not write this off. There are better games on Switch, Shakedown Hawaii being the perfect example, but you're going to get a good 15 hours plus, depending on if you want to find all of those secret areas and items, out of this game. Value scores 14 out of 20. I've really enjoyed my time with American Fugitive, although there are flaws present currently. It's a fun experience and it's a nice throwback to games of old, it just doesn't have the variety of some of the competition. What it does have is a really interesting casing mechanic, albeit a slightly flawed one, some lovely visuals, and a great sense of self. It scores a SwitchUp score of 73%. Thanks so much. We've had about 3 or 4 new Patreons over the last couple of days. Remember, we give away a free game just to our patrons each month, and we also give away a free game to our subscribers. We really appreciate the support you've given us, and as always, for all things Switch all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!